Before we get going, I'd like to ask all of you here on Zoom, once again, if you don't want your face to appear on the live stream, please turn off your camera now. And that said, on behalf of the Dutch United Nations Student Association, SIB-Groningen, I would like to thank you all for attending today's lecture, Symposium, actually. Whether you're joining through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, I hope you will learn something from the experts joining us today. Be that a short technical note on that front. The Q&A will be a separate segment once the speakers have both finished. So if you have any questions addressed to only one of the two speakers, please do still save your questions for the very end. If you're on Zoom, you can ask your questions in person once we call upon you. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, we will try to address the questions you post in the live stream chat. Now, all that out of the way, for those of you who don't know me, I am Matthias van Binsbergen, the Commissioner of Intellectual Activities of SIB-Groningen. And I would like to welcome you all to our virtual symposium on the aftermath of the Belarusian elections. If you've been reading the headlines, you probably have heard about the violent response to the protests in Belarus, the crackdown on Belarusian opposition leaders, and the internet restrictions which have been enforced following the contested Belarusian presidential election on August 9th. 6 weeks on, the protests are still going strong, despite the continued government crackdown. Just this weekend, hundreds of women were detained, among which a 73-year-old lady who had been a face of the protest movement and friends of some of the speakers who are here today. Our first speaker for the symposium, Dr. Tatsiana Chulitskaya, will be joining us to talk about these national developments. Dr. Chulitskaya is a Belarusian political scientist working at the Vytautas Magnus University, Faculty of Political Science and Diplomacy in Lithuania. She has a background working with public policy and administration in non-democratic regimes and has direct experience to Belarusian government through the think tank and NGO SIMPA. Today, Dr. Chulitskaya will be addressing civic mobilization, channels of communication, and the authorities' retaliation, amongst other things. Our second speaker of today, Dr. Anaïs Marin, will be addressing the human rights situation in Belarus, as well as the international reactions to the ongoing crisis. Dr. Marin has been the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Belarus since 2018, and has been a long-time researcher on the international diplomacy of authoritarian regimes. This aspect of the crisis in Belarus is also still very current, since just last Friday, the UN Human Rights Council adopted a resolution calling for dialogue between protesters and the political establishment, despite over half the council either abstaining or voting against. This situation of a mixed international reaction has been endogenous to the crisis since the moment the election results were published. So now, without further ado, let me stop highlighting relevant news for you and hand over the words to our first speaker of today, Dr. Tatsiana Chulitskaya.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me. It's nice to be here with you virtually, and I hope that we will have a nice discussion after the lecture itself. As it was already mentioned, I would like to make some points about national and internal developments in Belarus. Because nowadays there are a lot of discussions, I mean, academic and expert discussions on what is going on in Belarus from the point of view of international relations. However, I think it's essential also to talk about internal developments and national politics in Belarus. I will start with a statement that we observed an extremely high and even unprecedented level of social mobilization and even politicization of Belarusian society. This mobilization, it happened even before the elections, and of course we observe the same or even higher level of mobilization nowadays. In principle, it's very interesting that the Belarusian citizens, even those citizens who have never been interested in politics, they got mobilized during this campaign. They started to follow political news events. They started to attend political events and also publicly express their opinions. Basically, I would say that this civic mobilization caused the biggest in the modern Belarusian history rallies of support of the oppositional candidate Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, even before the elections. And nowadays we observe a transformation of these protest movements in a more mass protest and every week and sometimes even every day's rallies. In principle, we could talk about several reasons or grounds of the protest mobilization in Belarus. So in principle, if before the election it was a general articulated by Tikhanovskaya team and her supporters desire or intention for changes. So this for changes, the перемены, it was one of the main slogans of the pre-election period. But after the elections, we also see some other grounds were added. So first of all, we see that protests nowadays go against elections falsification and all kinds of frauds which happened during election period. The second point is that protests go against brutal violence of so-called siloviki, of those from riot police, of military service, of secret service in Belarus, and it also was one of the trigger of the current protests in Belarus. And the third reason or third dimension of protest is also demand to Lukashenko to leave his position and demand to conduct new and fair elections. So I should say that this idea of new and fair election is idea which is supported by all major protest movements and all protest participants in Belarus. However, I would like to also to reflect a bit on the reasons of such a huge mobilization which happened in Belarus. I mean, like nowadays there are a lot of questions why this Belarusian spring it's happening this year. It's happening now, not like in 2010, not in 2015. And I think that there are at least several reasons which should be taken into consideration. So first of all, I should say that there was a kind of a breakdown of the previously existed social contract between authorities and people in Belarus. If previously Belarusian people, they agreed to stay out of politics, having instead more or less stable personal well-being and so basically they were allowed to have their own business, their own families, their own life, to go abroad, including labor migration to neighboring Russia, and to live their own life. And in principle, the majority of populations, they were more or less satisfied with such social contracts. However, in 2020, there were several important triggers which broke this situation. The first one was this general tiredness of the population of Lukashenko himself, while he's in power for 26 years nowadays, and seems to stay longer if he's allowed. And this tiredness of population was caused by several reasons, in my opinion. So, of course, there was a worsening of economic situation in Belarus. So we observed during the previous years decrease in well-being, but also decrease of major macroeconomic indicators, and of course it's interconnected with stagnation or certain decline in Russian economy. So from the point of view of Belarusian situation, if anything happens with economy in Russia, it definitely influence economical situation in Belarus. However, I should say that this economic trigger, this economic ground was not maybe the most important one. The most important trigger was this, one of the most important triggers was this COVID-19 situation and inadequate policy of Belarusian authorities. It was a kind of anecdote how Belarusian president himself reacted towards coronavirus. However, Belarusian society in this situation, it was left to itself. So basically, Belarusian people, they realized that they should cope with this situation themselves. And the state, which has always promising them to protect them, to take care about them, the state just left them alone. So in Belarus, we observed during the spring period a huge rise of crowdfunding campaign, of this civic horizontal mobilization, when civic activists, they were supporting people from hospitals, they were gathering money and also products and also this protective mask and all other medicine stuff for doctors in Belarus. And in principle, after that company and after this campaign of mobilization, people in Belarus, they realized that maybe they could do a lot of themselves, not just to wait for authorities to help them. But the authorities themselves, they just didn't understand these changes which happened within Belarusian society, and Lukashenko, he just misinterpreted the situation, and Lukashenko himself and his officials, they were just attempting to have business or to do business in Belarus as usual. The next reason or the next trigger for this Belarusian protest was also situations that nobody from Belarus could actually leave the country freely. The borders were closed, and they were closed not by Lukashenko, but they were closed by all Belarusian neighbors. So Belarusian population, they happened to be in situation when neither labor migrants who used to work in Russia or in Poland or in Lithuania, they just could not leave Belarus, and also travelers. I mean, those people of maybe upper middle class who are used to travel, they were not able to travel, to leave the country, and so they were, forced to stay inside and maybe to some extent pay more attention to internal political situation. The next reason was appearance of new alternative candidates, and of these candidates of new types, because previously during campaigns in Belarus, electoral campaigns, we saw the candidates who were from this so-called traditional or old opposition. I do not like this concept very much. However, it has some it gives us some grounds for explanation. I mean, these people from old opposition, they were not accepted by broader public as representatives of the people. But during this campaign, we got at least two candidates from business circles and also from political circles. So we got one person from bank, from bank sector. It was Victor Babarika, and another one was IT entrepreneur who was previously close to Lukashenko, Valery Tsipkala. And we know from the point of view of events within the campaign that Babarika, I mean this candidate from bank circles, he was arrested in June. So basically, this arrest, it was also perceived by the public in a very negative way, and it was also a kind of a mistake and miscalculation of authorities and Lukashenko, who thought that if they just put somebody to prison, this candidate would make no harm for them. But they just didn't calculate that Babarika has a strong team who continued his campaign even without candidate. And there was one more very interesting candidate in this campaign. It was the husband of today's well-known Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Sergei Tikhanovsky, and he was a kind of a populist candidate. However, in spite of his populistic ideas and movements, he was well supported by general public in Belarus. So basically, there were at least 3 alternative candidates, not from old opposition, and they were attracting new public. I mean, Babarika and Tsepkalo, this IT guy and bank guy, they were attractive for middle upper class and just for middle class in general. And Sergei Tikhanovsky, he was supported by working class and also lower middle class. So basically, due to this broad support by different social groups, this mobilization, this mass mobilization, it became possible because like different people from different social groups, they found kind of new leaders whom they were ready to support. And the next reason of this mobilization was once again a miscalculation or mistake made by Belarusian authorities and Lukashenko when they decided to register Svetlana Tikhanovskaya as a candidate for the presidential campaign. So they refused in registration to other strong candidates, I mean, to this Babarika and Tsepkalo. However, they allowed Tikhanovskaya to participate in campaign, and from the point of view of authorities, it was still a part of the game, and they did not expect that the teams of unregistered strongest alternative candidates, they would support Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who just happened to be on the voting list. And then, I mean, those teams of all alternatives candidates who were not registered, they started to support Tikhanovskaya, and basically Tikhanovskaya got the strongest support from people from different social groups, and also strongest professional support from IT specialists, from different PR managers, and so on and so forth. So in general, this kind of a paradox of this campaign was that it was conducted by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and by this team of the people from different candidates' surroundings, and they conducted this campaign with a very positive messages in spite of all the violence which was going on in Belarus during even pre-electoral period. They were promoting quite simple but strong and powerful idea that Belarusians are amazing. So they were saying that Belarusians could do everything themselves, and as a result, the majority of Belarusian population, they just they trusted themselves, and they trusted also these opportunities for the better future. So there was a kind of a solidarity, but also kind of a social trust and idea of better future. So there was created a window of opportunities for the people and for the country. From the point of view of mobilization, it's also essential during the electoral campaign, but also nowadays that it's not just Minsk and big regional centers which are mobilized in Belarus, but also other cities and small towns. In some cases, even people in the villages, they got mobilized and they are involved in the current protest. So nowadays we see how citizens in different places are mobilizing themselves, and they intend to create self-governance. They also creating strike committees and other horizontal institutional structures in order to provide further mobilization and in order to provide further participation. So in principle, what we observe today, we observe creation of the real local self-governance practices in the country where these local practices did not exist before. And I should also mention excuse me, one more important and interesting element of this mobilization is mobilization of Belarusian diaspora abroad. So the people who, those Belarusians who live abroad during this campaign, and nowadays they participate actively in different online initiatives, in different solidarity movements, in any projects of Belarusian support. And this diaspora, it just didn't exist in the same shape before the elections as it exists nowadays. In spite of their tremendous violence against those who are protesting in Belarus, we observe I should say a positive type of mobilization, which is used by oppositional candidate, by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya nowadays. So in principle, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and her team, and also coordination council, which was created in Belarus, they are trying to mobilize people once again for changes, but also for setting a new positive agenda of future Belarus, or future democratic Belarus. However, nowadays we see mostly peaceful protests in Belarus. However, during the last 2 weeks, in my opinion, there were some changes in this totally peaceful character of the protests, and nowadays we observe certain tendencies of revenge, from the people's side to authorities. What people are doing in Belarus nowadays, they, for instance, try to make blacklists of those from riot police or secret services who are or were involved in violence. There were several cases of burning autos of the state propagandists and policemen. These are not this is not a tendency. However, I expect that while violence from authorities in Belarus is increasing, this type of negative mobilization and negative reaction from the people, it will also increase in the future. It might. So we also see that from the point of view of mobilization, there were a lot of protests, labor protests in Belarus. However, authorities are trying to suppress this labor protests, and what we see is that authorities are really afraid of a situation with working people on the big industrial enterprises who are protesting. So basically, at the beginning of of the protest mobilization of workers of the largest enterprises in Belarus, it was higher. Nowadays it's lower. However, still there are cases when workers they protest and they create their organized protesting groups, strike committees, and so on and so forth. And now I would like to say several words, at least, on the tactics of President Lukashenko himself. What he does, he used his usual tools of coercive mobilization with the standard tools of enforcement. So basically, he's trying to make people to obey. The main target groups of his campaign and of his activities nowadays is army, militia, and all kind of military structures in the country. So he started in electoral campaign. I mean, even before the elections, he was actively visiting different troops. He was visiting different stations, army stations, and so on and so forth. And basically his visits and speeches before the elections were addressed mostly to these people who are involved in riot police or military service. However, just after the elections and nowadays, we also see that Lukashenko tries to step on the road of positive mobilization and attract his real and or assumed supporters. So he organizes kind of rallies of support. For instance, last week there was a huge rally of female supporters of Lukashenko who were gathered in sport arena, in sport hall in Minsk. But irony of this situation is that Lukashenko is really forcing people to come, and for this female rally, for instance, they brought around 100 buses of women from the different part of republic, or from the different part of the country, and we do not know who of them participate voluntarily and who participate just because they were forced to participate. But just to sum up, I should say that the main pillars of Lukashenko support in Belarus are, first of all, this military and police bloc. And we know that up till now there were just several cases of when some military guys were leaving their positions. The second pillar is bureaucracy and state apparatus, and also civic servants. But I should also mention heads of the biggest state-owned and state-run enterprises who are great supporters of Lukashenko nowadays. But also, I should say that the situation within public administration is a kind of a real black box in Belarus. We do not know a lot about it, but we may say that Lukashenko is not so sure in some of the officials. For instance, nowadays he's changing ambassadors. He's also changing the heads of universities, for instance, the students of which were too active in the protests. And we also see that he's changing heads of this military ministers and of police ministry, and the idea behind all these changes is that he doesn't want anybody in his administration to get strong enough on their current position and to have more supporters from the ministers and from the people, from civic servants who are involved in different ministers. So basically, I think that there is a certain lack of trust from Lukashenko to his team and to the people who are supposed to be his main supporters. More broadly, from the point of view of supported Lukashenko, I should say that he is supported by those people who prefer to live in a way like nothing has happened in Belarus at all, and plus those people who believe and who trust propaganda in Belarus. Some points about tools and instruments of mobilization in Belarus and role of media. It's very interesting that nowadays there are no leaders of protests in Belarus. So these protests, mass protests, they are organized via Telegram channels. So they are organized via social networks and they are organized by people themselves who are joining in special Telegram channels, in special chats and groups, and they make plans where to go, how to go to protest, and where to meet, and all these details. And from the point of view of the protests, it's on the one hand it's good that there are no vivid leaders, while it's difficult for police to arrest these leaders, to find them. However, on the other hand, it's also a challenge for these protests, while people do not see who is their leader and whom they should support, and or who should be like on the leading position of this protests. I'll probably stop here, and I would be happy to answer your question later on. Thank you. Unfortunately, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Again, thank you, Dr. Chulitskaya, for your talk. It's very comprehensive. Thank you for the round of applause, albeit virtual. We'll now give the word over to Dr. Marin, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Belarus. Dr. Marin.
Yes. Hello, Matthias. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. So thank you very much, Tatsiana, for this very comprehensive overview of the domestic situation. As the organizers of the symposium asked me, I will focus on the international dimension. So I articulated my speech, which I prepared a bit at the last minute because I'm extremely busy these days, as you can imagine, as special rapporteur, along three lines, three main chapters. First, what are the, in the background, what is the explaining factors, the potential international explaining factors behind this revolt? Second, what is the current situation, also in terms of geopolitics? As we can see, there is an internationalization of the conflict. Sorry, I'll put my seat a bit up. Because of the obviously opposing views between so-called collective West and Russia as to what is happening, why, and what should be the way out of this crisis. And third, why is this crisis so interesting for the international community in general? And here I will, of course, remind of the serious human rights violations which we have observed and which indeed call on for more scrutiny, not only from the part of the UN, but we see finally some mobilization at the international level. So in my concluding remarks, I will try to share some views about how could this eventually help to find a way out of the current deadlock. So regarding the explaining factors, well, compared with other revolutions and electoral revolutions, if you want, in this so-called Eastern neighborhood or even in the Southern neighborhood, there are not that much of an international influence on what has been happening. As Tatsiana very rightly underlined, most of the explaining factors are to be found inside the Belarus, and there were very little interference before. I would like to remind that there are very few, I mean, Russia, of course, is an influential partner, neighbor, and maybe a patron for Belarus, but on the other hand, the EU, for example, has always had very limited leverage. And just a number of remarks on that issue. It seems to me that Belarus now is catching up with history, in the sense that the wind of revolt that didn't start on 9th of August, but actually takes its roots in much longer. You reminded of COVID, but even before that, there has been a sort of wind of changes in Belarusian society already dating back to the mid-2010s, sorry. And I would say that Belarus is catching up with the movement that was started in the region in 1989, in fact, because Belarus didn't have, for a number of reasons, its own popular revolution at the time. It received independence from the Soviet Union without having asked for it, in a way. And that is why after Mr. Lukashenko came to power in 1994 and started basically changing all the institutions to tailor them for his own needs, which are to expand the survival of his own autocratic regime, there were no real attempt at seeking democratic achievements in the region. There was no democratic revolution ever in Belarus. So maybe the moment that we see now, this year 2020, you can call it the Belarusian Spring or whatever, it reminds me more of the Velvet revolutions that happened in Central Europe in the 1980s, and then the so-called color revolutions that happened in Ukraine, in Georgia, in countries which in fact had already had a taste of what democracy looks like, which the Belarusians hardly had a chance to have, maybe between 91 and 94, and it was extremely limited. Another element that explains why actually there is very little international ingredients to the current situation is also because the election, which sparked the contested election, which sparked the protests that we are witnessing now, have been held almost behind closed doors. So there is, because of the COVID, which limited, which meant that borders were mostly closed, and several journalists could not go to the country, most of them because they didn't receive an accreditation or an invitation, timely invitation to come to observe the elections. And this holds true also for the OSCE, which has an organ specifically dedicated to international election monitoring, the ODIHR, and ODIHR didn't receive a timely invitation to deploy a mission to observe the elections. So, so therefore there were no international observers, almost no international observers for this election, which is a problem, because then when we claim, based on our experience and knowledge about this country, that the elections were not free, fair, and transparent, our opponents, both in Belarus or beyond, further east, would claim that you have nothing to base your allegations on because there were no election observers. And that is why also the evidencing the frauds, the electoral frauds that occurred already before 9th of August during the early voting period, and especially after during the vote count, is extremely difficult, and it only relies on the domestic observers, and to a certain extent on electoral commissions at local, at precinct level in polling stations. Some of them have been conducting a honest vote count. This is especially the case in the polling stations that were opened in consulates abroad. For example, in Warsaw, Mrs. Chulitskaya was elected with 80% of the vote among the diaspora, the Belarusian diaspora here. And we can of course, underline the fact that this result would not have been possible if the electoral authorities in the embassy, meaning the personnel of the embassy, had respected the orders, which were probably to give Mr. Lukashenko the expected score of 80%, as you know. So these discrepancies that we have observed on the protocols that were communicated to us and to several international independent election monitoring organizations such as GOLOS, evidence that the officially announced results are not credible. And this is what sparked the protest that we have seen. This is important to remind also the fact that this current Belarusian spring is not comparable to previous electoral revolutions, such as color revolutions in Ukraine, because it helps to evacuate the claims that are made recurrently by the Russian authorities and media outlets of state media, that the protesters would be on a Western payroll, because this is their traditional answer in case a color revolution occurs in the neighborhood, is to claim that the protesters are on a Western payroll, that they are paid to go in the streets, that they are supported by the West, and that therefore it is a geopolitical struggle. As you have noticed, the protesters are not waving any EU flag, and this strongly distinguishes this movement from other electoral protests that we have seen in Ukraine in 2004, but also even in the southern neighborhood, you know, in Northern Africa, for example. Again, there is no evidence of Western involvement in organizing or supporting the protest. What the Russian propaganda channels these days are stressing is that because of the internet closure, which started on the 9th of August, on election Sunday, and lasted for at least 3 days, people turned to Telegram channels as the only free channel for communicating and coordinating eventually between people, so that they knew where to go in the streets to meet and protest. And because of the internet closure, basically only a few Telegram channels were the only independent sources of news for many people. And one of them, which was set up by a young 20-year-old Belarusian student currently living in Warsaw, Stepan Pucila, his channel is called Niechta, and it turned out after a couple of days to be the only coordinating force in a way. So now they're accusing him of having coordinated and organized the protest. It's just that because there were no other outlet or even information channel for people to organize themselves, indeed, Niechta was not only publishing videos of people hitting to the streets, so the numbers, you know, when the official channels were claiming that there are just a couple of protesters in the streets, there were hundreds of thousands from day one. in the regions as well. And so he was disseminating through this Nechta Telegram channel and on YouTube a number of videos of how massive the mobilization contesting the official results were. Also videos about the violence of the crackdown that started immediately on the 9th, the 10th. It was extremely intense during the first days, and even evidence of the said tortures when people were coming out of detention or coming out from hospitals. They were showing their wounds, and pictures were taken, videos were circulated, and it was mostly through this Nechta channel. And since we have noticed that the protests have become basically permanent, they are taking place on a daily basis. We hear it in the Western media, mostly on Saturdays and Sundays, because Saturday is the Women's March, Sunday is the general march, where indeed hundreds and thousands of people are taking part in this. But on a daily basis, at district level, around your metro station, people are indeed gathering in the streets and to protest in very inventive ways. And it is true that Nechta had indeed provided a platform for communicating to people, be careful, there are omonce at this metro station, go to another one, and this kind of thing. But this has been a way for the Russians, for example, to accuse Poland, namely, to be behind it, behind the protests. And this brings me to the more geopolitical dimension of the current crisis, my second point. And here I will be more vocal about the elephant in the room, you know, like Russia. So as a backgrounder, what I can say about the Russian influence, interference in this situation. First, it should be reminded that Russia has no horse to bet on. The whatever has been said about potentially Mr. Tsikhanowski or Mr. Babariko or Mr. Tsipkalo as being supported by Russia, it's not exactly true, at least not proven. They might have had some support from private business, even oligarchs in Russia, but the Kremlin, the Putin's administration, didn't have and has never been able to have a decent opposition leader in any of the previous elections. And this year was no exception. And this is because maybe Russia has neglected to really invest in developing this alternative to Mr. Lukashenko. And that's why when the whole situation started to unfold already in July, when it turned out that basically this election would again not meet international standards, would again be won't be recognized by the West, because most of the challengers to Mr. Lukashenko's rule were either in prison or in exile. The Russia decided probably to sit back and wait and see how Lukashenko would deal with this situation, with the protest that inevitably emerged once the official results had been proclaimed. Because if Mr. Lukashenko had conceded victory with only 55 or 60% of the vote, maybe there wouldn't be such a situation today with so much street protests. It's just that this figure of 80% was extremely, was simply not to be believed, given that all through the spring, hundreds of thousands of people were already gathering in the streets in spite of the COVID, in spite of already some repression by the police, to give their signatures to alternative candidates. So what Russia is interested in now, I believe, is to maintain Mr. Lukashenko in place for as long as he can be useful to them. As you may know, there is a strong defiance. Well, Mr. Lukashenko and Mr. Putin don't like each other. They have had to deal with one another for several years now. They know how to deal with one another. But it would be wrong to assume that the Kremlin would unconditionally support Lukashenko. even if they don't have an alternative for now. And I think that what Russia is doing now, providing support, at least diplomatically and financially, the financial support is not much, 1.5 billion, mostly in loans, which will serve mostly to extinguish the previous debt of Belarus towards Russia, towards Gazprom mainly. This is not enough to help the Belarusian economy survive. It will keep it afloat for 2-3 more weeks. So this should not be seen as strong support from Russia. I believe that what the Kremlin has in mind instead is to guarantee two things. First, that that they keep a hold on the transition of power and the succession to another leadership, and that they can remain influential, so that the person who would come out of after this transition, whether it's in 6 months or 2 years, would not be anti-Russian. That's the most important for them. And that is why, and that's the second element about this, Russia seems to be supporting the plan of Lukashenko regarding these protests, how to manage them, of launching a constitutional reform, where this has been announced already actually 2 years ago, and nobody could really believe in it, because we know that Mr. Lukashenko is not the kind of dictator who can reform itself and democratize ever. But the Russians are supporting the idea of having a constitutional reform which would grant more power to the legislative branch, and currently the parliament of Belarus is just a pocket parliament with absolutely no prerogatives. So that would be a start to actually not even have a balance of power in the sense that we would understand it, but at least delegate some prerogatives and some responsibility to the parliament and the government, the prime minister and the cabinet. And this would be useful actually for Lukashenko, in order to blame the government for the expected aggravation of the economic crisis, which is looming, which will hit the country extremely hard in the coming months. So that was, again, a survival tactic, typical survival tactic from an autocratic leader. But why the Russians are supporting especially this model for out of crisis strategy, because it would leave them time to place their prawns, which they don't really have at the moment. They do have influence on media, on how public opinion is made, and they have military interests. They have all of this, but they don't have a pro-Russian political figure who would be also legitimate or become popular in the eyes of the Belarusian electorate. And that is also why for Putin, probably at this time, the most important is to not let the Russian audience or the Western audience believe that changes in Belarus could occur as a result of street mobilization, of popular mobilization, because this is where it becomes a danger for Putin personally. So this is why I think they are trying to waste time, to gain time in order for eventually they hope that the protests will die out by themselves, because it's it's September, it's not August anymore, so people go back to work. Soon it will be maybe too cold to gather in the streets, and so there will be more pressure, economic tensions as well. So they bet on the fact that the protests, also because we see that the repression are not receding, they're not escalating that much, but they are present all the time, and therefore they bet on the fact that the protests will eventually die out, and that therefore then it will be time to launch a succession process to get Lukashenko out and find somebody else to replace him, somebody who would be acceptable for Russia as well, but that this process can be disconnected from the current street protests, because if it turns out that popular mobilization can oust an elected president in Belarus, this could happen as well anywhere else in the neighborhood, in Russia and in Russia's neighborhood as well. And this would be a challenge for Putin personally, since he just had a successful referendum to prolong his own rule over Russia for several more years. And so this is what he has to avoid at all costs. And maybe you have seen in the in Minsk some of the placards of the protesters were in solidarity with Khabarovsk, because there has been street protests in Khabarovsk in Russia for several weeks already, and we see already this transnational solidarity emerging, and with the power of online information channels, of social networks, this would be extremely dangerous for Putin personally if there was any kind of inspiration from Belarus towards Russian civil society to also raise up and protest against the power appropriation by their own leadership. The third point I wanted to address here regarding the international dimension of this crisis is related to, of course, the human rights violations, which, of course, I have been recording as Special Rapporteur for the UN for the past months. And why is it of interest to the international community? Belarus has been in the spotlight for several years. For example, my mandate was established by the Human Rights Council back in 2012, following the last massive repression that occurred after the 19th of December 2010 elections. At the time, there had been over 1,000 people who were arbitrarily detained, out of which several presidential candidates, several were beaten, held in custody by the KGB with, we had no news from them for several weeks. So that prompted the UN Human Rights Council to establish this country mandate of Special Rapporteur, tasked with monitoring the human rights situation and reporting twice a year to the Human Rights Council in Geneva in July and to the General Assembly in October. And year on year, my predecessor, Miklos Harashti, has highlighted that there has been absolutely no progress on the road towards democratization, and that none of the recommendations that he made year on year were being followed. And when I was appointed in 2018, I was perhaps a bit too optimistic or naive, but I thought that since the EU and the United States had lifted their own sanctions against Belarus in 2016, there was sort of an atmosphere of normalization in Lukashenko's relations with the West. He had been airing promises, for example, of eventually adopting a moratorium on death penalty, and we could see that in Europe in particular there was a strong interest towards a normalization, and that they would accept even small steps, small reforms or cosmetic reforms in order to just get out of this deadlock situation of sanctions and no communication and no institutional background for developing, for example, trade relations, and there are strong also business interests behind this normalization. But it was not justified at the time by any progress on the Belarusian side towards meeting the conditions attached to the sanctions. Maybe political prisoners had been liberated, but after they had almost served the entirety of their prison term. And in fact, back in 2015-16, the main motivation for Western countries to lift the sanctions were the events taking place in Ukraine. The fact that the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and then the Russian disguised and then evident involvement in the war in eastern Ukraine was raising alarm in several countries, Belarus included, that Belarus could be next on the list. And that is why, just as in the same vein as it had happened in 2009 when the EU launched its Eastern Partnership policy, it included Belarus in spite of the bad track record of the government in terms of human rights and democracy. Back then, already in 2009, Belarus was included because there had just been the war in Georgia, and there was again this fear that leaving aside Belarus from EU efforts towards its Eastern Partnership would bring counterproductive results. But at the end of the day, when following the lifting of the sanctions, there was a belief that Belarus would indeed make some progress. The Belarusian MFA, several diplomats were quite convincing in making believe that the country was ready to implement some changes. And it's the first ones, actually, those diplomats who either defected or were fired over the past weeks. In fact, as you may imagine, in such an autocratic country, no ministry has any kind of autonomy for going towards a dialogue with foreign partners. At the end of the day, it's always Mr. Lukashenko putting a halt to any kind of normalization. And this is what happened also when the EU was starting to be more demanding. Where was I? Sorry. Yeah, I was saying that the Belarus had been at the center of attention for a long time. Also at the UN level, for example, in last year, 1 year ago, the report I presented at the General Assembly of the UN in October was dedicated specifically to human rights violations in Belarus in the context of elections. And I was criticized for this because, well, elections had not been taking place yet. There were parliamentary elections scheduled in November, and then the presidential election for this year. But what I could see is that there had been absolutely no progress in law and in practice, no changes, no reforms that could have led us to hope that elections would be more clean than they had been in the past. And over the year in 2020, I published a number of allegation letters together with other special rapporteurs. There are thematic special rapporteurs on freedom of expression, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of association, independence of judges, etc. And when we saw, starting in March, April, how the regime was already having a very heavy-handed approach to whatever kind of dissent could come up from civil society, we forecasted that it would go from bad to worse, and this is indeed what happened. So we were not surprised when the human rights violations intensified during the week of 9th of August. So I can give you a little overview of the situation. In the first 3 days after the vote, 6,700 people were arbitrarily detained. So it was mostly peaceful protesters. It was also passers-by, no aggressive people, but there were randomly captured, some of them captured in the street by men in plain clothes, put in minivans, unidentified minivans, and because of the internet closure, it was extremely hard for relatives to even know where their loved ones were either being held or detained, or if they were in hospital, conscious or not. So it was an extremely chaotic situation during the first 3-4 days, and this is exactly when the most serious violations occurred. And here we're talking about cases of torture, which have been documented and registered. We have the figures, confirmed figures for at least 500 people who have suffered inhuman treatment in detention during those first days. And this is what means that this is what justified the involvement of the UN at this stage, because although all human rights are universal and there is no political civil rights would have a higher ranking than cultural and economic rights, for example, there are some human rights violations which are imprescriptible and which are extremely serious. For example, when they can be alleged to form part of a premeditated crime against humanity. And this is what we are currently working on. I don't have the expertise on this, so I'm not going further in that direction with you. It's just a hint that the extent and the systematic character of the human rights violations that have been reported to us during the first week of after the 9th of August vote could amount to crimes against humanity. And so this is already international humanitarian criminal law, which could lead eventually Mr. Lukashenko to The Hague, which means that the perpetrators of these violence and these tortures would be held accountable. I mean, you've seen all these criminal tribunals that have been established, usually when the situation was one of international conflicts, usually during wars, that you see such human rights violations. But here we see that the authorities are at war. I mean, Mr. Lukashenko is at war with his own people, and even if they are, of course, denying these crimes are extremely serious, and they mean that the attention of the international community on Belarus will not recede. And nowadays it's at several levels. Just so you know, the UN Security Council has held so-called ARIA formula meeting on the 4th of September. So it's an informal meeting because there is no consensus, of course, among especially the 5 superpowers, those who have nuclear weapons, to get Belarus on the agenda. Russia and China are obstructing these kind of moves, but nonetheless, a critical mass of governments could manage to have Belarus set on the agenda of at least an informal meeting. It lasted 2.5 hours. I was invited, Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya was there, and several governments took the floor to protest and share their concerns regarding the news that we get from Belarus. And of course, the Russia, which was had the floor at some point as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, denied massively all kind of allegations, and used its traditional whataboutism tactic, reminding of how France has treated the yellow vests, and how colored people are mistreated in America. It was following this George Floyd affair, etc. But nonetheless, the majority of the voices that were heard there were, raising the alarm on the fact that these human rights violations are absolutely unacceptable. Further on last Friday, there was urgent debate on Belarus at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, again at the initiative of European countries. For the UN Security Council, it was Estonia. Here at the Human Rights Council, it was Germany in the name of the EU. And a resolution was adopted at the end of the debates, which tasked the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mrs. Michelle Bachelet, to write a special additional report specifically on the human rights violations that have been taking place since 9th of August. So I'm very happy about this because I have absolutely no time to study this. I mean, you need a whole team, you need resources that the UN doesn't have to conduct such an investigation. And I am also non grata in Belarus. The government doesn't recognize my mandate, so I'm not allowed in. And it would be extremely difficult in these conditions to gather the testimonies of victims of human rights violations. Then there are several other initiatives which I welcome, of course, at the OSCE level. The Moscow mechanism might be triggered. It's also a form of international scrutiny into the human rights violations that have been committed. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has established a working group that will investigate the situation. All in all, whereas in the beginning of the post-electoral crisis, there was little attention and definitely no coordination at international level to answer this situation. Nowadays, there is scrutiny motivated mostly by the fact that there have been these serious, systematic, premeditated, extremely serious human rights crimes of torture. When it comes to the post-electoral deadlock, here, unfortunately, there is no. I don't see any solution. It's a catch-22 situation for the international community of democratic states, if you allow me, because on the one hand, you cannot not recognize the elections and recognize Mrs. Tikhanovskaya as president-elect. It's impossible. So here the all the countries, and notably the EU countries, are in a sort of deadlock, and whatever they claim would be challenged not only by Belarus, of course, by the current regime, but also by Russia, because if you don't have observers, you cannot say the election was illegitimate and or was violating standards for free and fair elections. And if you nonetheless claim that these elections were manipulated, you cannot affirm that there is another president-elect than the one who has been officially proclaimed. Which means that unfortunately, I believe that the international community will have difficulties making a positive contribution to the exit scenario from this crisis, because it is extremely divided. We've seen today even the EU itself is divided. There was today a meeting of foreign ministers towards the adoption of sanctions against 40 members of the higher echelons of power in Belarus, including Mr. Lukashenko, and the perpetrators of violence, but also those who are responsible for the electoral manipulations, notably the head of the Central Electoral Commission, who has been on the sanctions list in the past, and Cyprus has obstructed, has vetoed the sanctions. So in that regard, I'm not very optimistic about the chance, notably for the EU to help to find a way out of the situation. The only thing it can do is to support Belarusian civil society as it is doing. Worth noticing, of course, is the role of several EU member states, notably neighbors of Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, Sweden, Czech Republic, a number of countries are extremely mobilized and providing Belarusians with notably humanitarian aid, which is still the priority from my perspective. And but as a player, as a regional player, I doubt that the EU would have leverage or would have in itself enough clout to move on with a possible resolution to this crisis, meaning that everything now would stay in the hands of the OSCE, which is now headed by Albania, but Sweden is next. and then will come Poland in 2022, and therefore there is currently a troika of these three countries, and they are, of course, focusing on the situation in Belarus and trying to, they offered the good offices of the organization, of which both Belarus and Russia are members, to help to find a way out of the succession deadlock. But of course, everything will rely on the motivation of the interested state, meaning Belarus. And as you know, Mr. Lukashenko doesn't want to leave office, so he will probably not welcome any kind of mediation from the OSCE. That will be all for me now, and I will look forward for questions, and thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Marin. If we can get another virtual round of applause. Now we're going to move into the Q&A. Again, as I said at the beginning, we'll just be calling upon you if you want to ask your question. If you're in the Zoom call, in order to ask your questions, you just click the participants button, and then you should have an option when hovering over yourself. So if there's anyone who has a question already to begin with, feel free to raise your hand and ask away. All right, if not, then I will just begin with my own question. Oh, wait, no, okay. Christoph Schweiger, if you could please turn on your camera when asking your question as well, that'd be much appreciated.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you both for your interesting insight. My question is regarding the foreign media coverage of what's happening in Belarus. Has there been any positive or negative effects as a result of this coverage? That's it. Thanks.
If I may, like with this foreign media coverage, it's a bit tricky situation because first of all, not all the media are allowed to come to Belarus because of some technical reasons. For instance, before the elections, some Western media, they didn't apply for accreditation, I mean, in advance because of all coronavirus situation. And when they applied, it was a bit too late. And the Special Commission of Minister of Foreign Affairs, we should gather in order to provide foreign journalists with accreditation. They just decided not to gather and not to provide some foreign journalists with accreditation. And then there was a situation when some foreign journalists, they were just coming to Belarus without accreditation, and it caused some difficulties. So, I mean, it's just technical details about while this is challenging with this foreign media coverage. However, from my point of view, the problem with foreign media coverage is that they pay too much attention to this geopolitical dimension, but too little attention to internal agenda. And sometimes it's a kind of misinterpretation of what is going on, because it seems to be like conflict just between like the West and the East, I mean the West and Russia. And it seems like Belarusian people, they are not like subject or actors within this conflict. And I think that is the main drawback of this foreign media coverage in Belarus.
Thank you. I hope that answered your question, Christoph. Nina.
Yeah, thanks first of all to both speakers for very interesting insights. And I actually have a question to both. It's very much of a speculation, but does one of you or do both of you think that Lukashenko will eventually step down and make room for someone else, or do we have to expect for the situation to continue for several more months or maybe even years?
Tatsiana, you want me to take that one?
No, you're welcome to be the first one.
I don't think Mr. Lukashenko is the kind of person who would voluntarily step down. He made it very clear already. he said at some point, you know, you'd rather kill me than expect me to give them the country away, because this, you have to understand that there is such a personalization of power in Belarus for the past 26 years that not only him, but a number of people inside and outside of Belarus believe that should he leave, the country would collapse. At least this is what the Russians, for example, I mean, the pro-Kremlin media in particular, if you listen to Evening with Solovyov, for example, it's the kind of things that they are saying, that it's worth supporting Mr. Lukashenko till the end, because otherwise the country would collapse because there is no successor. We are not in a scenario where the leader would have prepared his own succession. It's not Kazakhstan. It's not. I mean, maybe he has been thinking about staying there in power long enough and having a constitutional reform to put down the age when someone may run for president, so that his son could run instead of him. But you see, it was like a very long perspective. He didn't imagine himself being challenged that way this year, and he doesn't see himself living anytime soon. So I don't think he would voluntarily step down. The only thing he would do is negotiate his exit. So he might exit at some point, but after having got very significant guarantees that indeed he will not have to go to The Hague to respond for his crimes. And that means that currently the Putin is his only ally, and as I tried to stress, even from a Russian viewpoint, he's very much replaceable. As soon as they would have found somebody who can be more reliable and defend Russian interests, they would be willing to support that challenger, that alternative. But the problem is that there is none at the moment. Mr. Lukashenko has consistently cleared up the field, organized purges regularly in all the possible, you know, ministries and in his own administration, in the military, to make sure that no person with experience of the administration, you know, no bureaucrat could emerge and also be popular, would also have some charisma and could therefore become a challenger. And that is why that's actually a problem for when we think at the perspectives for power change and democratic transition in the country, is that there is nobody we can bet on. And with all due respect for Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya, but currently the coordination council that was established to try and negotiate this transition with the authorities first has been disseminated. The presidium of all the members of the presidium are either in jail or in exile, save for Nobel Prize winner, the author Mrs. Alexeyevich, who is old and with failing health. So there is no alternative coming up, and that is why, for example, in state media in Belarus or in Russia, you hear very much this: who would the international community is calling Lukashenko to dialogue with the opposition, with civil society, but who could be an interlocutor for him? And they claim, for example, I hate that expression, but they claim that Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya would be a lže Dmitry. This is the expression I've seen in Russian media, a false Dmitry, somebody who is claiming the throne with no legitimacy to have it. But on the other hand, you see her in Western capitals, now touring the EU, being received almost with the honors of a head of state in several countries. But for Lukashenko and others who would have an influence on the transition process, she remains a nobody, and that is what makes the situation extremely difficult from a political point of view, is that Lukashenko would not voluntarily step down if he believes that there is nobody to take over, not only to protect him, offer him guarantees, just like Yeltsin stepped down and first negotiated that Putin, gives him guarantees that he will never be worried by the justice system. There is no such person to take over in Belarus currently. So he can continue claiming that he is irreplaceable for some months still.
Yeah, if I may just add several words, I think that like Lukashenko might step down if Putin stepped down. I mean, like situation is nowadays it's indeed that Lukashenko is too much supported by Putin, and like we, as Anaïs said, it was like in Russian media that he's just it's nobody to change him. I mean, to change Lukashenko. However, we see that probably Russia is not also so satisfied with Lukashenko anymore. I mean, and if we imagine situations that Russia is not satisfied with Lukashenko, he is losing basically a very important pillar of his international support. And in this situation, I also see a kind of windows of opportunity. It's one window of opportunity, and the second window of opportunity is this continuations of internal pressure. I mean, from civil society on Mr. Lukashenko. And in this situation, even if he sees no change for himself, I mean, there might be some changes. However, of course, it could last for months and even years. I mean, this struggle, and it's very complicated and almost impossible to say like when and how civil society could win in this struggle.
Well, thank you. Bart?
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank both of you for your lectures. Thank you very much. This question is for either of you. Lukashenko had this kind of personality cult of typical strongman around him for a long time. Some, I don't know, some mystery surrounding the man, and he had at least fervent supporters in the past. And now that the social contract, as you said, has been broken, and in my opinion, many times over, what are still reasons for some people to be fervent supporters for him in Belarus?
I would say that for some people, I mean, there are people definitely who believe in this propaganda ideas that there is nobody who could change Lukashenko, and Lukashenko is a kind of a guarantee or guarantor of stability in the country and in the region. So it's one group of supporters of Lukashenko. There are also like people who, in principle, do not see that or trust that any change is possible. I mean, these are kind of this pessimist-minded people. They say that yes, in principle, a lot of things are going on. However, Lukashenko is still strong enough, nothing could be done to change him. For instance, like my mother, she's claiming so. She's saying that it's just impossible. He will stay whatever. So she doesn't support him, but she believes that it's impossible just to replace him. So I would mention at least these two big groups of people. I mean, those who fairly believe in Lukashenko. But I would also mention those who believe in Lukashenko pragmatically, from pragmatic point of view, and this may be the most dangerous people. These are the people from his surroundings. I mean, all these officials, all the heads of the state-run enterprises, all, I mean, this, people whose material well-being or whose economical well-being is providing by the current regime. And for them, it's question of their own survival, because if there is no Lukashenko, they just will not survive. They will not have their position. And it's, I mean, these are people from this state-run enterprises and all different bodies of public administration, different institutions of public administration, but these are also people, for instance, from court system. I mean, judges, they're also, I mean, they're highly dependable on the current system. And so basically this pragmatic background or ground for Lukashenko support is very essential and very strong one, in my opinion.
All right, I hope that answered your question, Bart. If there's any more questions, please do raise your hand. If not, again, I do have a question of my own. You're just talking about other influential parties or people who like to see Lukashenko succeed and stay in power, etc. Do you know if there's any other parties who have an influence in power besides Lukashenko? Because in foreign media, you'll always hear Lukashenko this, Lukashenko that. Is there more behind the scenes which goes on in terms of political elites in Belarus?
You know, one colleague of mine, political scientist Andrei Kazakevich, he said about political system that it's very simple or very plain political system in Belarus, where everything depends on one guy, I mean, just on Mr. Lukashenko himself. And unfortunately, it's true. Like everything depends on him. I mean, from this general idea of this political system, because all the major decisions are made by Lukashenko himself. And basically, I mean, we do not know anything, almost anything about parliament, who is supposed to be the representative institution of Belarusian people. There are some strongest elites within this military bloc and within this police bloc. However, they are either totally devoted to Lukashenko, or Lukashenko is replacing them like quite on time for them not to get additional support within the ministries or within the institutions they are heading. So, I mean, answering your question from my point of view, if you do not hear about anybody else except Lukashenko, it's just quite logical because of the whole political system inside Belarus.
I would add to this, and maybe it's also an answer to the previous question. You have to remember that the Belarus under Lukashenko is not only a dictatorship, where indeed there is only one person ultimately making all critical decisions and appointments and firing people, purging whenever somebody is having ambitions, he will be purged from the system and stop being a threat or a force for change from inside. The other problem is that we desperately miss sociological data. The last independent sociological institute, NISEP or ESEPS in English, was had to close down in 2016. Tatsiana, correct me if I'm wrong. I think this is when Manayev, the director, left for working outside, I mean to Japan, I think. But anyway, there were no more funds for maintaining this, the work that was being done, which was an extremely good professional work that was being done from Vilnius, of course. He didn't have registration inside Belarus proper. And and that's one of the collateral damages of the lifting of sanctions, is that suddenly the money that was earmarked for civil society was somehow not anymore available for these kind of organizations, independent organizations or independent media after 2016, either because the donors thought that there is no more problem in Belarus since sanctions have been lifted, or because when making a choice between whom to fund, if there were programs to be implemented with the authorities, even at local level, you know, little administrations, a hospital, whatever, they would do it because it was forbidden for all the years when the country was in sanctions, and then suddenly it became possible. And this was money that was taken away basically from civil society organizations, which still desperately need it. And nowadays we see the consequence of this is that this very institute, a sociological institute, has not produced any more research since 2016, and we miss it because it was the only one almost. And it is extremely hard to get an understanding of what people think, be there among the electorate in general, or especially with, of course, very interested in this at this current period of time. What do the insiders of the regime think at different echelons of power, in the bureaucracy, among the diplomats? So we see on the surface some events. We saw the governor of Grodno in the first weeks of the protests, almost siding with the protesters, or at least guaranteeing them that he will prevent the anti-riot police from arresting the people and these kind of things. So he was fired, of course, and you see this in the diplomatic ranks, where you had a number of defectors, followed by a number of firings, and that is also one reason why I think it's extremely difficult to imagine, really, to understand who is supportive, who might defect, who might have an influence, who might pop up as a successful alternative to Lukashenko. This is of course a problem. And regarding what are the reasons for people to support him, I think that when you have lived for because there has been no real experience of democracy, it was only 3 or 4 years in the 1990s. Basically, you have to look at the situation now as a continuation of the Soviet Union, and so there is so much to be done to de-Sovietize the country, and therefore, in the absence of this trigger and this demand, and now we see it. Now there is obviously a demand, but how representative is it of the 9.5 million population? We don't know. Again, we lack the figures, but for sure, by inertia, because of this. This type of system that the communist, that the Soviet Union was, and that paternalistic autocracy of Lukashenko has been, people are just not really willing to think by themselves. I mean, the majority is happy with what they have, and they have the TV giving them such heavy propaganda about how bad it is in Latvia, in Lithuania, in the West, etc. How good we are here, with the roads are clean, there is no criminality, So there is still, unfortunately, I don't know if it's a critical mass. Again, we cannot speak numbers, but there is a number of people who feel fine with the situation with Lukashenko, and also people who directly depend on him, meaning since he is responsible for appointing almost everybody at strategic positions, be it director of hospital or governors in the region, or head of state-owned enterprise, and all this, these people know that if they raise their voice to criticize Mr. Lukashenko or make proposals for some reforms, they will be ousted, they will lose their jobs. But also, if the country changes and they don't change at the same time, they will also be losers, because they are afraid of not having a job in tomorrow's independent and free Belarus. Will they be competitive? I mean, the challenges ahead. I remind this because whatever happens, even if Mr. Lukashenko goes one way or another, the challenges ahead for reforming the country and for making people happy, so to say, and guaranteeing them jobs and the possibility to feed their families are enormous.
All right, wow, thank you. It's very thorough. If there's no further questions now, I will hereby end the symposium. Thank you again so much to Dr. Marin and Dr. Chulitskaya for your talks and for the Q&A. I thoroughly enjoyed it for one, and I'm guessing the rest of you who are here did as well. And with that, I'd now like to hand over words to the president of our association. Usually I would make statements regarding upcoming events and regarding what we'll be doing in person in Groningen this week, next week, and the week thereafter. But since there have been a few developments, we feel the need to hand over to our president to make a short statement.
Well, just from my side again, thank you so much for coming and giving this very interesting symposium. As Matthias said, I have a few words in regards to upcoming events because some things did change in our planning. So as you guys probably know, a second wave of COVID-19 infection has been hitting Groningen in the last few weeks. And this has particularly been hitting students very hard. And while we in the SIB currently do not have any positive cases of corona, there are multiple members showing symptoms who are currently waiting for their tests or test results. So we do not feel that it is safe to organize physical events until we know for sure what is going on. And therefore the running dinner organized on Wednesday will be postponed to next week. And then we will see further what is possible to organize. That means that we are not sure what that means for other upcoming events in the next few weeks, but we will contact everybody as soon as we do know.
Regarding intellectual activities, they will be continuing as normal, except they'll be continuing online. So instead of the upcoming diplomats dinner, we'll try and organize an alternative, if possible, in terms of upcoming lectures hereafter. They are all already set online, so please join us on the first actual intellectual activity on October 12th for a lecture regarding open science, and for the lecture on October 19th, the symposium on climate adaptation. And yeah, I think that's all the intellectual activities coming up. Again, please do stick around for the after talks. Today, instead of hosting it in person, after we will be sticking around on Zoom. So if you want to join us for a game of Scribblio, just like at the beginning of the pandemic, we'll be doing that again too. And excuse us for media getting cut off for internet failure. Also, I'm supposed to say from the board that we haven't officially yet cancelled the diplomats dinner, but we're going to make sure it happens safely. So we'll let you know what happens in that regard in the coming week. And then again, thank you to Dr. Marin and Dr. Chulitskaya. Sorry for making you sit through all that. It's just something important to announce to our members and interested people in the SIB.
Thank you. Good luck.
Yes, so thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.
All the best.
Bye.
Scribblio.
We're back. Oh my
We're
God.
back at the beginning. Back where
I'm
we
excited. I haven't played this in like 2 months.
Months, honestly. Yeah, since the Kai Week, really. For new members, or if you weren't here before, you'd always end up playing Scribblio and shit after the lecture. But
For those of you sticking around, I would also very much recommend turning on your cameras. It's nice to see your faces.
you don't have to though.
You can't see them in real life.